general role of the collection within eCinema. Definitely in the cases of the evenings curated by external curators or institutions, we really try to push the collaboration with the archive, so that for a lot of these people it's also new, so that they approach us, they come to us with and start discovering the collection with new eyes. That's kind of my role, according to the idea and the concepts of the institutions or students or curators, to try to find the match within the archive and to surprise even the students or people with what we have, so that the new work can be seen in a different way, also by connected with old work, and on the other end by looking at the old work in a different way by mixing with new work. So a dialogue between old and new. That's for me still remains the most important part of having a collection, not just to give it a value because it's old, but to give it a value in a new context, to see it with new eyes and explore and find out more, because a lot of things that I see made now have been inspired willingly or unwillingly by what has been done before only, and most of the time the people themselves are not aware of that. So I like to see these connections being explored. And then in the historical line of eCinema, that is based almost 80% on our collection anyway, and on our restorations. So that's, let's say, the feeding ground for the historical line is the collection. But we hope that we can develop a feeding line with a curated part too of eCinema. That's really what we are trying to work on hard and to develop. I'm not very familiar with the Japanese experimental cinema, apart from Tajiri. So Tajiri was really the only filmmaker I knew from that I could identify as, okay, belongs to the artist and experimental cinema. And so for me it was also a discovery in a way. And it's interesting when you have a researcher like Julian, someone who's dedicated to go deeper into the theme, the subject, that all the information comes up. Is a way also to look into the collection of the archive and through different eyes, and then find out more information. And so for me, watching the prints, it was totally discovery, because I never seen those films before, and it made me think about a little bit the history of our programming, because it's a strange mix also. These were copies that came mostly from old distribution companies in Holland, and sometimes from our own distribution. So there was obviously in the 60s, 70s a lot more going on than we now maybe can imagine. And this is to be traced back into the history of the copies in the archive. There is not a lot of information, because, for example, on some other filmmakers that you were requesting, like Wakamatsu, for example, and Terayama, I think. We have material, but there is no information on the material. So I think now for the program that is going to happen next week, the work has been done, but it would be very much interested in continuing the collaboration and have you, as a researcher, let's say in-house researcher, maybe finding out more information about the copies, about the filmography, about the content, and help us fill the gap of our database, so that the research can be really, in a way, used and made available again for other researchers and so on. Because at the moment it's a kind of obscure part of our history, the state of the copies, there is no information on them, and a little bit is known on how they came, also that one is not really known. So it would be really interesting to have you go deeper into that the part of the collection, and then exchange, let's say, the services in this way, which I think is the best way we can do it. I wonder if tajiri is well known in Japan. Actually, I'm really curious about that, and I wonder if, yeah, I think it would be great. I really haven't done research on that myself, but it would be interesting to find out this, and also whether we can contribute, if it hasn't happened yet, to that, to make the work of tajiri known in Japan.
Yeah, I think that's another step
Yeah.
we should take after
Yeah.
this program, because I was researching Tajiri's activities, and he's exhibited his sculptures in the early, in 1963, I think, in Tokyo Gallery.
Okay.
And he also did like a 6-month visit to Japan, where he won an award at the Mainichi Shimbun group exhibition. So he
So as
was
a
for a
sculptor,
time as
yeah.
a sculptor. Some of his work was shown in Japan, but
Probably
I mean,
not as a filmmaker.
definitely not as a filmmaker, I don't think. So I've spoken to a few researchers who work in Japan and on Japanese cinema and Japanese art,
Yeah.
and they weren't aware of his
No.
work. So I think particularly
Interesting.
his films
Yeah.
are lesser known in Japan, and perhaps we could in the future do a program
Absolutely.
at a festival or
Absolutely.
something in Japan.
I think it would be great.
Yeah.
We got recently from a photographer, a collector, let's say, photographer, more material on tajiri, which we haven't preserved yet. It still has to be viewed and researched. But actually, is related it's really interesting footage, because it's really shot at the castle where he lived and where one of the daughters still live in Barlo. And it really depicts him in his work and living environment. And you see the two daughters as a young children, and the wife, of course, which was also herself an artist, Ferdi. So it's very interesting footage, but it's still not part of the collection in an official way. But it could be interesting to complete a bit of picture of tajiri also for us.
Yeah.
And then from there we can take it on to maybe Japan.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, a festival I had in mind was in the photography museum in Japan, and they have a annual festival on. It's called the Image Festival,
Okay.
and so I was thinking maybe we could approach them to
Yeah.
show a program in their photography museum, so even these photographs perhaps could be exhibited. When we check prints and things, like what archivists and researchers and curators are looking for with the prints. I mean, the noise and the colors fading. And
Yeah,
maybe it's
yeah,
worth
absolutely.
talking about those.
Yeah, I mean, it's a general problem of collections anyway in the archives. Nowadays, the audience, let's say, expects everything to be spick and span, as we say, like totally clean look, which comes from the DVDs or from whatever, or the new stuff that you can find online. And the reality of the archive, the collection of the archive is always different. And definitely with experimental films, they really tell the story of their. The copies really show their history, basically. Whatever happened to the prints is visible, and so it can be scratches, can be fading, can be noise in the sound, can be cuts, can be old splices. It's show the making of as well, and the way, and also they show the care that have been given to them by the makers or by whoever took them in the first place into the archive. And so it's a combination, it's layers after layers after layers, and basically we are like little detectives. Whenever we open a can and we put it on the table, if we can put it on the table, viewing table, I mean, then we start understanding, like archaeologists, these layers of history that prints have had. And so that's our job, really. And then the other one is to document and to try to find information, document what these layers of history were. And of course to try to give attention to films that we discover or we think are important for whatever reason. And yes, in this case we talked about it. I have notations about the prints we watched, and they were not all very good. Unfortunately, some had fading, some had scratches and all these things. Only in this case it's a bit difficult to take some actions because ideally in the ideal world you would probably start selecting these films in need of preservation to do something about it. But we still need to research and to know more about their position, their value in our collection, which means that first we need to know whether these films are unique or not, whether there are other institutions that are taking care of these films, because we are all part of a FIAF, Archive Federation, which means that before we start taking care of Japanese cinema, we should inquire with our colleagues in Japan whether they are doing the same, whether we should unite maybe the efforts. And on the other hand, by creating attention from the programming curating point of view, so if a retrospective would come to Holland or an exhibition, and we found out that the copies we have are really unique, that would be a good argument to preserve the films, again in collaboration with our Japanese colleagues. So it's all linked, it's all a puzzle, but in case of Tajiri it was very obvious why we did preserve his films and invest into the collection, because he had such an important role in the history of art history of Holland, in the Cobra movement of sculpture. And yes, so it's part in a way of our international history of film. So in that case there was no doubt that we were going to make an effort. And in this case it's still not so clear what are the roles of these copies. And I mean, the role of this copy, it's obvious that it was shown here, and therefore it's already important, therefore it's also part of the collection. But to preserve it, it's another step. And for that step, which involves always a lot of money and time, we need to have the picture complete about the context. And so this is a bit how we work.